Have you ever imagined a kiss so cold it could turn anyone to ice, but somehow spared a single human? If you're intrigued by a royal power capable of freezing hearts, literally, and the one scientist whose mere touch unravels centuries of fear, then you're about to step into a story unlike any other. In this incredible tale, Princess Aria's lethal kiss once doomed anyone bold or foolish enough to try it, until Dr. Rowan arrived. Together, they unravel hidden conspiracies, expose forbidden experiments, and risk everything to reshape the destiny of an entire moon. Curious about the twists and triumphs ahead? Don't miss out on the full story to learn how one extraordinary kiss leads to a breathtaking showdown that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Before you dive in, we invite you to subscribe to this channel to support our work and stay tuned for more amazing stories. Your presence and encouragement mean the world to us, and we can't wait for you to embark on this journey. Princess Aria's silver-white hair cascaded down her shoulders, catching flickers of light from the towering ice pillars in the Grand Hall. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her regal bearing emphasized by the etched patterns of frost swirling across the train of her sapphire blue gown. Around her neck rested a teardrop-shaped gemstone set into a delicate choker, an heirloom that glimmered with each measured breath she took. Despite the glacial beauty of her surroundings, a certain tension filled the hall. Courtiers in pale attire watched her warily, as if expecting her slightest movement to unleash a deadly winter's chill. The hush that permeated the crystalline audience chamber felt stifling, and it only grew more oppressive as a young envoy from the far reaches of a neighboring star system stepped forward with a mix of awe and trepidation. Arya had grown accustomed to these anxious gazes. For as long as she could remember, rumors about her lethal kiss had made their way through every court from here to the Federation's distant capitals. She, and all in her lineage, possessed an ability, if it could be called that caused her lips to freeze any person who dared to kiss them. In fact, the garden behind the palace now housed a series of ice sculptures, each one a victim of a momentary impulse to prove bravery or secure favor. By courtly tradition, it was expected for an envoy, especially one seeking an alliance, to greet the princess with a ceremonial kiss on the hand or cheek. But any who attempted a kiss on the lips were met with an instant transformation. Flesh turned to crystal ice, and breath was swallowed by an eternal frost. Sometimes, with the right thermal tools, the victim could be thawed within hours. Other times, the memory of that tragic miscalculation remained forever on display in the garden. Yet Princess Arya had not asked for this burden. She had never once chosen isolation or cruelty. The curse, or perhaps the genetic quirk, remained a bitter inheritance. Standing at a height that surpassed nearly every being in her court only furthered her sense of separateness. She kept her chin high, posture poised, but in her deepest reflections, she carried a loneliness that gnawed at her heart. Standing beneath the splendor of the chandelier-like icicles overhead, she wondered if she would ever know the warmth of another's genuine, unguarded affection. Thus, when the envoy, a trembling, fair-skinned diplomat named Calix, dared to approach with the bold intent of sealing a new trade agreement with a ceremonial lip-to-lip salute, every onlooker held their breath in dread and fascination. Arya's eyes widened, and she had only a moment to inhale before his lips met hers. The kiss itself was fleeting, almost delicate, but the consequences were immediate. Frost radiated out from the point of contact, swirling in intricate patterns across Calix's cheeks and jaw until his pallor turned a stark blue. The resonance of the crystal choker at Arya's throat pulsed in sync with her racing heartbeat, sending shimmering refractions of light across the chamber. Then, as always, the transformation overtook the unfortunate envoy. Within seconds, his figure stiffened and became an ice statue. The gathered courtiers let out a collective gasp. A hush followed. Arya withdrew, her expression a mask of calm control that belied her inner turmoil. This was no new tragedy for her. It was simply another reminder that no one could touch her without risking a fate worse than death. Yet a strangled knot formed in her chest at the sight of another life momentarily lost to her curse, certain that the poor envoy would need hours, perhaps days, to recover, if he recovered at all. A measured voice cut through the stunned silence. "Your Highness," said Lord Helmar, Arya's chief advisor, and the man responsible for managing the palace's complex array of responsibilities. He was tall and composed, with pale skin that bore traces of frost-like tattoos along his temples. We can have the envoy move to the recovery wing at once, where the medtechs will do what they can. Though he maintained a polite facade, Helmar's gaze was keen and there was the faintest hint of chastisement in his tone. He had served Arya's family for years, guiding them through delicate court intrigues, and he held a particular interest in ensuring the stability and secrecy of the monarchy's unusual genetics. With a nod from Arya, attendants in matching ice-blue robes approached to wheel the newly formed statue away. Ornate crystal doors etched with swirling symbols that told the history of her lineage swung open to reveal a far more surprising sight: two off-worlders entering the audience chamber. One was a middle-aged Federation diplomat with stern features and graying hair. He wore an official uniform marked by an embroidered crest, signifying the interplanetary alliance he represented. His name was Marcus Lane. The second newcomer, walking just a step behind Lane, was younger, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, and possessed a decidedly warm complexion in comparison to the moon's pale denizens. The younger man had short, dark hair, sharp eyes, and a sense of curiosity that seemed to light up his features rather than overshadow them with apprehension. "These are Federation representatives," Lord Helmar announced, inclining his head slightly. "Diplomat Lane, welcome once again to Glacia Prime. We had received word of your intention to bring a specialist with you." Marcus Lane bowed with a carefully measured politeness. "Your Highness," he said, addressing Princess Arya directly, "it is an honor to be received in your court. Please allow me to present Dr. Rowan Cooper, an esteemed xenobiologist from our Federation's top research institute. He has spent years studying unique physiologies across the galaxy. We hope his expertise may shed some light on the intricacies of Glacia Prime's unusual challenges." Rowan Cooper stepped forward. Arya noted that his demeanor was calm, neither awestruck nor fearful as so many outsiders tended to be. He gave a slight bow, his gaze lingering on her choker for a moment before meeting her eyes. "Your Highness, I'm grateful for this opportunity. I've read about the phenomenon you and your people experience, and I am here only to learn and perhaps offer whatever insights I can. I have no illusions that I'll find an easy fix, but if there's any path forward, I hope to discover it alongside you." A hushed murmur spread among the assembled courtiers. Princess Arya, conscious of Helmar's unwavering scrutiny, extended her hand. It was a gesture intended both as a greeting and a careful test. Most newcomers flinched or showed some sign of reluctance before touching her. To her silent astonishment, Dr. Cooper reached out without the slightest hesitation. Their fingers brushed, and her cold skin seemed to meld strangely with the warmth of his. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden burst of frost, no trembling on his part. A ripple of surprise went through the onlookers as they realized the human was not recoiling in pain or fear. Arya withdrew her hand gently and noted the young doctor's inquisitive expression. Her pulse quickened at the realization that he truly felt no adverse effect. To maintain composure, she addressed him in a level tone. "We have prepared a laboratory to facilitate your studies, Dr. Cooper. Since the Federation has sanctioned your research, you may begin whenever you see fit." After the formalities of court concluded, Lord Helmar guided Dr. Cooper and Diplomat Lane through the many passageways of the palace. Each corridor was designed in pale, gleaming ice that allowed specks of colored light from the surface to filter down, creating a dreamlike ambiance. Small, frost-lined windows revealed glimpses of the moon's exterior. The Frost Gardens, where the newly frozen envoy would likely join the silent ranks of Arya's unintentional victims. And beyond that, a sprawling city of ice spires reaching toward a sky filled with shimmering auroras. Rowan's eyes darted around, absorbing every detail. He occasionally paused to run a small handheld scanner across the walls, collecting data that might provide insights into the native crystalline materials. Diplomat Lane, however, pressed forward with the singular determination of a man on a tight schedule. "Just so you're aware," Lane said quietly as he matched Helmar's stride, "the Federation remains concerned about the volatility of this phenomenon. Princess Arya's abilities are not fully understood, and the danger they pose should not be underestimated." Helmar nodded gravely. "We've been managing this reality for generations. It was more contained once before the monarchy's powers grew with each successive heir. We hope that science might uncover a more sustainable approach, if not a cure. Rowan, who was keeping pace behind them, ventured a question. I've read accounts in Federation archives suggesting there might be an artifact or device that helps regulate the princess's freezing ability. Is that correct? He gestured vaguely toward his own neck, referencing what he had observed on Arya. Helmar's expression tightened. That detail, Doctor, is not a matter of open discussion. However, since you're here under official sanction, I can confirm that the choker Princess Arya wears is indeed a device older than any living memory we have on Glacia Prime. Its primary function is complex, but you may think of it as both a magnifier and a limiter, depending on how it's calibrated. Diplomat Lane rubbed his chin. So the monarchy's powers might be even more intense without it? The Federation's interest in this is as much political as humanitarian. An unchecked ability like hers could be devastating if it fell into the wrong hands, or if it became uncontrollable. Helmar did not offer a denial. Instead, he stopped before a sealed door etched with swirling lines that formed Glacia Prime's ancient script. We are at the research wing. Dr. Cooper, you'll find everything you need inside. Princess Arya may join you shortly, but please remember that you are here as a guest. There are many aspects of our world you do not yet grasp. Sensing the veiled warning, Rowan inclined his head politely. I appreciate the caution, Lord Helmar. I'll be mindful. As the door slid open, Rowan and Lane stepped into a starkly lit space filled with advanced equipment, much of it featuring designs reminiscent of the palace's architecture, sleek lines and frosty motifs. In that moment, Rowan felt a tingle of anticipation run up his spine. He had accepted this posting because of genuine scientific curiosity, but also because something about this cursed princess and her lethal, involuntary power resonated with him more deeply than he could explain. When Princess Arya arrived in the lab an hour later, Rowan was already setting up preliminary experiments. The laboratory's surfaces were composed of shimmering panels that doubled as both displays and data interfaces. Wisps of cold vapor occasionally trailed off the corners of the counters, maintaining a carefully regulated low temperature. A series of test tubes and slides stood on a backlit panel, each containing samples of local flora or purified ice from Arya's domain. He'd been collecting baseline data on the planet's unique crystal-laced environment, hoping these samples might provide clues to the biology of Glacia Prime's royal bloodline. Arya observed him quietly before making her presence known. Though she was used to commanding attention, she found it refreshing to see him so focused on his tasks, like a man who derived genuine satisfaction from scientific exploration. She coughed softly to announce herself, and Rowan turned, smiling in a way that seemed genuinely warm, not forced or overly formal. Your Highness, Rowan said, offering a polite bow of his head. I hope the day hasn't been too burdensome given the earlier incident. She noticed how he avoided calling it a tragedy or catastrophe. Most off-worlders didn't possess that level of tact. The burden is no worse than it has been any other day, Dr. Cooper. Though I fear the envoy who attempted to kiss me may not remember his ill-advised decision kindly when he thaws. I'd like to run a few non-invasive scans on you if that's all right, Rowan said, a note of apology in his tone. Just basic readings, body temperature distribution, electromagnetic fields around your choker, that sort of thing. My ultimate aim is to understand why your physiology triggers such potent freezing in others. Arya gave a slight nod, stepping closer. Now that the audience chamber's protocols weren't bearing down on them, Rowan realized how tall she truly was. Her gaze slightly above his own, her posture both imposing and strangely vulnerable. Her skin, pale as moonlight, possessed a faint luminescence. Carefully, Rowan lifted a small device near the area around her choker, scanning it. As he did, the gem flickered in a rhythm that matched Arya's pulse. He narrowed his eyes at the data streaming across the handheld screen. Fascinating, he murmured. This choker is emitting a wave pattern that seems to resonate with your cells, but the amplitude fluctuates. Are you aware of it changing intensity? Arya considered. I know when the ring grows warm against my skin, it often coincides with heightened emotions. She said the last words with a slight reluctance, as if admitting to having emotions might reveal too much. Rowan took a step back and let the device rest. It's possible that heightened emotions might exacerbate the freezing effect. Perhaps the choker tries to regulate your body's response when you're upset or excited. If that regulation falters, the freezing is stronger. Have you always worn it? Since I was a child, she answered. My mother wore one as well, and hers was passed down from an ancestor. It's been in the royal bloodline for centuries, if not longer. By the time I was old enough to understand its significance, I was told that removing it might be dangerous. Over time, that became an unchallenged fact. As Rowan made a note on his datapad, he glanced at her expression, seeing a flicker of longing he couldn't quite place. He realized it might be the desire for human contact, a chance to feel someone's warmth without rendering them comatose in a shell of ice. He wondered if, for all her regal authority, she lived every day in a kind of gilded loneliness. Part of him, scientifically detached, wanted to unravel the mystery of her cold touch. Another part of him, more personal, wanted something else entirely, to let her know she wasn't alone. Elsewhere in the palace, Lord Helmar strode down a corridor lined with tall, crystalline windows overlooking the frost gardens. Through the hazy pane, he could see the envoy's ice-encased form being tended to by medtech specialists, who used controlled heat pulses to gradually melt the shell. Helmar tapped on a secure communicator, connecting to a private channel reserved for palace administrators. His voice, cold as the environment, resonated with a hard edge. The Federation doctor has started his preliminary work, Helmar said, turning sharply into a hidden alcove that contained advanced communication consoles. We must ensure all data is monitored. Nothing leaves this planet without clearance. A crackle of acknowledgement came over the line. Helmar ended the call with a satisfied nod, but his expression remained tense. There was more at stake here than a single human scientist might guess, and Helmar intended to remain vigilant. He flicked through a series of encrypted messages from the Council of Elders. They expressed concern that the princess was growing too curious about the nature of her powers, too receptive to the idea of dissecting the monarchy's ancient secrets. Some whispered that Aria's alliance with off-worlders might threaten centuries of tradition. Others feared the Federation's presence might lead to deeper scrutiny, unearthing truths that could destabilize Glacia Prime's entire political structure. The monarchy's formidable freezing ability had, after all, not arisen by mere accident of birth, though Helmar preferred to keep such revelations deeply buried. As he stepped away from the console, Helmar nearly collided with Commander Joran Cade. The commander was a tall figure with a pronounced scar crossing his cheek, a mark from a past skirmish not easily forgotten. He wore a dark uniform accented with subtle glacial symbols, denoting his rank within the planetary defense forces. His single good eye held a gleam that might have been curiosity or mischief. "Excuse me, my lord," Cade said, stepping aside. The corridor was quiet, empty save for the hum of the palace's temperature regulators. "Word travels fast that the Federation specialist has arrived. I trust everything is proceeding smoothly?" Helmar took a moment to gather his composure, nodding curtly. "As expected. Keep an eye on him, Cade. He may be naive about Glacia Prime's internal matters, but curiosity can be a dangerous trait. We must ensure that Princess Aria remains under careful watch. She has grown too comfortable around him already." Cade raised an eyebrow. "I've heard rumors about her actually letting him touch her hand. No signs of frostbite. Fascinating indeed." "It's precisely that fascination which might unravel centuries of work," Helmar snapped. "We must ensure Dr. Cooper's presence does not threaten our future. If he disrupts the delicate equilibrium we have here, the entire monarchy could be imperiled." With a non-committal nod, Cade watched Helmar stalk away. The commander turned to gaze out the window at the frost gardens, where the envoy's statue glistened under the moon's pale sun. Despite outward loyalty, Cade allowed himself a small smile. The Federation's arrival and the princess's unusual response to this human doctor might herald changes Cade had awaited for some time. Whether those changes spelled liberation or destruction was yet to be seen. Later that day, Princess Aria led Dr. Rowan Cooper to a secluded section of the palace, the thermal baths. Unlike the rest of Glacia Prime's architecture, which was built to preserve cold, This space harnessed geothermal pockets buried deep beneath the planet's crust. The result was a gently steaming pool ringed by smooth stones that constantly sparkled with minute crystals. Many of Arya's ancestors had used these thermal waters for medicinal or research purposes, particularly when faced with ailments that required higher temperatures to study or treat. "Are you sure this environment is suitable for our tests?" Arya asked, standing at the edge of the pool. She wore a fitted bodysuit designed to retain a controlled chill on her skin, though her arms and legs were bare below the elbows and knees, exposing pale skin that caught the steam in translucent patterns. "Usually we keep everything cold, for a reason." Rowan, having changed into a simpler, heat-resistant suit, crouched by the water's edge. He dipped a small sensor into the pool and watched the readout. "The idea is to test the limits of your thermal regulation. If your condition is truly tied to an internal interplay of cold and whatever energy the choker emits, then immersing in a warmer environment might provoke interesting data." He looked up at her, offering a reassuring smile. "I'll be careful, I promise. If at any moment you feel unwell or sense the freezing effect is intensifying, we'll stop." A wry grin curved Arya's lips, though it held an edge of self-awareness. "It's not me I'm worried about harming if something goes wrong. Though I admit, your confidence is refreshing." Rowan slowly slid into the pool, letting out a soft sigh at the warmth. He held up the sensor, gesturing for Arya to join him. Initially, she hovered by the edge, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. Yet, after a deep breath, she stepped in, water rippling around her calves and rising to her waist. Unlike Rowan, she exhaled a barely noticeable gasp as the warmth enveloped her. It had been years since she had allowed herself to experience open heat on her skin. The monarchy insisted on carefully controlled temperatures to minimize accidental freezing outbursts. They moved closer to the center, steam curling around them like phantom veils. Rowan gently reached for Arya's hand beneath the water. He felt her flinch ever so slightly, as if expecting him to recoil in pain. When he did not, when there was no sudden stiffening of ice, her breath eased. "I think the suit is helping maintain a stable boundary layer of temperature," he explained, though his tone was softer than usual. "But also, it appears my physiology just doesn't react to your freezing aura in the same way." His free hand rose, fingertips brushing against her cheek, eliciting goosebumps that were not solely due to temperature changes. Arya's pulse raced. She could feel it, and from Rowan's intent gaze, he sensed it as well. When he drew her closer, she felt the gentle pound of his heartbeat beneath the surface of the water. Before she could question the wisdom of the act, their lips met in a tender kiss. Instantly, the choker at her throat glowed, a swirl of frosty light emanating from it. She tensed, anticipating Rowan's abrupt freezing, but instead of turning to ice, he drew her in closer. The swirling light hesitated, flickered, then subsided. Arya let out a disbelieving gasp and pulled back slightly, just enough to stare at his face to confirm he was indeed unfrozen. In that instant, new hope kindled in her chest, an emotion as warm and disarming as the waters surrounding them. Just as the astonishing realization settled between them, the metallic hiss of a door unsealing echoed through the steamy chamber. Both Arya and Rowan turned to see diplomat Marcus Lane stepping into the area, clearly discomfited by the sudden wave of heat that hit him. He wore a formal Federation jacket, beads of sweat already forming at his temples. "I'm sorry to intrude," Marcus said, clearing his throat, "but I received an urgent message from Lord Helmar. There's been an incident near the main palace gate." Arya stepped out of Rowan's embrace, her regal composure swiftly returning. "What sort of incident?" she asked, voice tinged with an undercurrent of concern. Marcus glanced at Rowan, choosing his words carefully. "A group of outside dignitaries arrived earlier than expected, visitors from another world who hoped to negotiate trade terms. They became agitated when they learned about the envoy who was frozen this morning. Some threatened to terminate discussions unless their safety is guaranteed." As Arya moved to exit the thermal pool, Rowan caught her elbow gently. "Your Highness," he said in a low tone, "this might be connected to your powers in more than a political sense. If they fear you or think the monarchy wields too much danger, they could use it as leverage in negotiations." Her eyes flickered with frustration. "I've lived my whole life dealing with others' fear. But if this escalates, it could undermine our entire relationship with the Federation, not to mention spark wider hostilities." Marcus nodded. Hence Lord Helmar's urgency in summoning you. He wants you to address these dignitaries directly, perhaps allay their concerns. Dr. Cooper, perhaps you should come as well. Your presence as a neutral Federation scientist might provide reassurance that there is no immediate danger. Rowan glanced at Arya. Their intimate moment had burst like a soap bubble, replaced by the harsh realities of political pressure. Yet the kiss lingered in his mind, proof that her lethal ability had an exception, a glimmer of possibility. I'll be there, Rowan said firmly. Let's see if we can resolve this peacefully. Minutes later, the three of them were navigating a different set of corridors. These lined with historical tapestries woven from specially treated fibers that could withstand Glacia Prime's sub-zero climate. Arya, still damp from the thermal bath, had thrown on a flowing cloak that struggled to retain her cold aura. Rowan walked at her side, quietly analyzing the sudden shift from private discovery to diplomatic crisis. As they neared the gate, the sound of tense voices echoed through the ice crystal corridors. A handful of foreign dignitaries, dressed in thick fur-lined garments, stood in a semicircle. Lord Helmar was already present, flanked by Commander Joran Cade and a retinue of palace guards. Helmar's posture was stiff, mouth pressed into a taut line. The moment Arya appeared, the dignitaries took a step back, and one of them pointed accusingly. There she is, the one whose kiss can freeze a person's very soul. The words reverberated off the crystalline walls, stirring an uneasy hush. Arya lifted her chin, well aware that the next moments would be crucial in shaping how both her people and these off-world guests perceived her. For Rowan, it was a stark reminder of what they were truly up against. Not just a scientific anomaly, but centuries of fear, tension, and mythos surrounding the monarchy's lethal touch. With the frost-laden air heavy around them, the confrontation promised to reveal whether hope or dread would define Princess Arya's reign, and whether Dr. Rowan Cooper's remarkable immunity could alter Glacia Prime's future in ways neither side had ever anticipated. Princess Arya's composure did not waver as she stepped forward to face the small cluster of disgruntled dignitaries. Steam from her still damp hair rose in curling tendrils, hinting at her recent immersion in the warm thermal pools. Though she stood at a formidable height, her calm expression and measured voice softened the impact of her commanding presence. The lead dignitary, a wiry man wearing a bulky fur cloak that seemed excessive even in Glacia Prime's chill, stared at her as if unsure whether to bow or retreat. Honored guests, Arya began, inclining her head in formal greeting. I apologize that your first hours here have been marred by fear. I can confirm that the envoy who attempted to kiss me earlier is receiving medical attention. He will recover. She paused, letting her words echo. However, my abilities, our royal lineage's particular condition, have long been a subject of concern. I regret that it poses a threat if not properly handled. A murmur swept through the dignitaries, some glancing skeptically at Dr. Rowan Cooper standing beside the princess. He cleared his throat and stepped forward, addressing them in a voice that managed to be both cordial and firm. I'm Dr. Rowan Cooper of the Federation's Research Council. I've come specifically to study and potentially mitigate Princess Arya's involuntary power. In the short time I've been here, I've discovered that much of the palace technology, indeed, much of this planet's infrastructure, exists to manage and contain these abilities. The monarchy does not wield this power maliciously. An older woman with sharp features wrapped in furs jabbed a finger at Rowan. And yet you have no guarantee that this freezing kiss will not be inflicted upon anyone who offends the crown, whether intentionally or by accident. Our peoples will not accept such risk. Lord Helmar observed silently from the sidelines, eyes narrowed. His posture suggested that he would interject the moment negotiations tilted in the crown's disfavor. Commander Cade stood a short distance away, leaning against a frosty pillar with an expression of polite disinterest, though his single good eye flickered watchfully. Diplomat Marcus Lane flanked Rowan, prepared to add a Federation perspective if tempers flared. Princess Arya clasped her hands before her. The gem in her choker glowed faintly, catching the frosted light that spilled through the corridor's ornate windows. I offer my assurance that no harm will come to you or your delegation. We maintain strict protocols. The incident this morning was an unfortunate breach of etiquette, a misguided attempt at a symbolic kiss. So long as the proper boundaries are observed, you have nothing to fear. The dignitaries exchanged glances. At length, the wiry man in the fur cloak cleared his throat. Perhaps words alone are insufficient, Highness. We request a demonstration, a sign that you can manage this affliction, something more tangible than promises. Helmar's stiff posture eased fractionally, as though he had anticipated this demand. But Princess Arya's eyes flicked toward Rowan, a silent question in her gaze. He hesitated, recalling the moment in the thermal pool. If these off-worlders needed tangible proof that Arya's power could be kept in check, then perhaps he could provide it. Before anyone else could speak, Rowan calmly approached Princess Arya, placing one hand upon her gloved wrist. Gasps echoed through the corridor. He met her gaze, silently asking for consent. After a brief moment, she gave a subtle nod. Carefully, Rowan raised her hand, turned it so her palm faced him, and pressed a gentle kiss upon her cool skin. No icicles formed along his lips, and no crystals sprouted from her glove. His breath did not freeze in his lungs. A tense silence spread through the gathering. The dignitaries watched, jaws slightly slack at the defiance of centuries of rumor. Arya swallowed, her sapphire choker flaring for an instant as her heartbeat quickened. Yet Rowan stood unharmed. He exhaled, stepping back to his place beside her, feeling a wave of relief pass between them. As you can see, Marcus Lane said, taking advantage of the dramatic pause, the princess's condition, while dangerous, can be contained, especially with the right knowledge and precautions. We ask for your continued cooperation and courtesy while we conduct our research to ensure everyone's safety. Slowly, the older woman in furs inclined her head. Very well, Highness. For now, we will resume our talks under the assumption that we are not in imminent peril. But you must understand, our people will watch these negotiations closely. Arya offered a regal nod. I would expect nothing less. With the tension partially diffused, Helmar guided the delegation to one of the side halls, where refreshments suited to off-world palates had been prepared. The dignitaries followed, still wary, but less confrontational than before. As the group dispersed, Rowan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned to Arya, whose usually composed features held a trace of relief. That was bold, she murmured, though I suspect Lord Helmar did not appreciate your impulsive demonstration. Rowan quirked a small smile. Sometimes it takes a direct approach to subdue fear, and if it buys you time to strengthen diplomatic ties, then I consider it worth any personal risk. He glanced at her gloved hand, though to be honest, after what happened in the pool, I'm beginning to think I'm not at much risk at all. Arya's eyes shone with a complex mixture of hope and caution. Before she could respond, Lord Helmar cleared his throat and approached them. Even with his formal posture, there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested displeasure. Princess Arya, Dr. Cooper, a word? He gestured to a quieter alcove just off the main corridor, its walls carved with scenes depicting Glacia Prime's royal lineage. Arya followed, Rowan at her side, his expression outwardly neutral. When Helmar stopped, his gaze flicked from one to the other. That display just now, he said in a low voice, was too public. I do not question your motives, but Dr. Cooper, you must realize your relationship with the princess is purely professional, while these negotiations remain precarious. Lord Helmar, Rowan said, treading carefully, my demonstration was driven by necessity. The delegates were ready to walk out. Showing them that Princess Arya's touch can be safely managed, at least where I'm concerned, was an expedient way to diffuse the tension. Helmar's expression remained guarded. Be that as it may, you must understand the deeper implications. The monarchy's abilities, and the choker technology that regulates them, are matters of great sensitivity. If word spreads that you are immune in ways never before seen, it may invite unwanted attention. Certain factions within our political structure prefer control at all costs. They see any divergence as a threat or as a tool. Princess Arya stiffened. Is there a specific faction you believe would use Rowan's immunity against us, Helmar? She glanced at the carved walls, recalling old rumors of power struggles dating back generations. Surely the stability of Glacia Prime would be the highest concern for all who dwell here. A shadow crossed Helmar's features. Idealism aside, Highness, there are those who, if they learned of Dr. Cooper's unique resistance, would consider capturing or exploiting him to achieve their ends. We must be vigilant. Rowan folded his arms. I appreciate the concern, my lord, but knowledge can't be stifled forever. If my immunity can help Arya, if it can help your people avoid future incidents, then isn't it worth examining openly? A flicker of annoyance appeared in Helmar's eyes, but he tempered it. The monarchy's secrets have endured centuries of scrutiny. They will not unravel in a single day. Proceed with caution. Dr. Cooper, Princess, I suggest you continue your duties as normal. He made a short, formal bow. If you'll excuse me, I must attend to these delegates. The moment Helmar left, Arya let out a quiet sigh. He's always been devoted to preserving tradition, she said softly. Yet sometimes I sense he knows more about my powers than he admits. He's never openly defied me, but I've caught glimpses of deeper machinations in how he manages court affairs. Rowan angled his head, studying her expression. You think there's something he's hiding about your lineage? Or about the device you wear? I'm certain of it, she replied, gazing down at the softly glowing sapphire at her throat. This choker may hold secrets lost to time, and I worry that if Helmar deems our research too disruptive, he'll try to stop it. Later that evening, Rowan returned to the laboratory, determined to continue analyzing data collected from Arya's earlier tests. The space hummed quietly with an otherworldly radiance, as if the entire room had been sculpted from living ice. Translucent panels scrolled with sensor readouts, temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic fields, and cellular scans from the blood sample Arya had allowed him to draw a few days earlier. He tapped through the data, brow furrowing at certain anomalies. The structure of her cells, especially around the areas correlated with the so-called freezing effect, contained crystalline lattices interwoven with organic matter, something entirely unprecedented in standard xenobiology. Each time he compared the results to the baseline of an ordinary humanoid, the difference was stark. Arya's cells were almost engineered to conduct sub-zero energies. Yet, to his astonishment, bits of the code looked artificial. It was as though at some point in her lineage, a foreign element had been introduced, making her body capable of harnessing and emanating this lethal chill. Moreover, the data suggested her choker was attuned to these engineered sequences. A hiss from the lab doors startled Rowan out of his thoughts. In stepped Commander Jorn Cade, his scarred face partially obscured by the dim light. He paused, took in the array of data on the screens, and offered a slight grin. Working late, Doctor? Rowan nodded, his posture uneasy. He couldn't quite read the commander's intentions. I've found some unusual elements in the princess's genome. I'm trying to determine if her choker is purely regulatory or if it's actively contributing to these changes. Cade walked around one of the lab tables, gloved fingers brushing against a container of crystalline instruments. There are many legends on Glacia Prime, stories that the monarchy's power was no accident, but the result of careful manipulation across generations. Some say it was to defend our world from invaders. Others claim it was a misguided attempt at perfection. Regardless, the monarchy has never been fully transparent. Rowan studied him. In which version do you believe? A ghost of a smirk tugged at Cade's lips. I believe that power is never given without a price. Perhaps your arrival is a sign that old secrets can't remain buried forever. He glanced at a screen filled with genomic mappings. Lord Helmar asked me to keep an eye on you, though I suspect he wouldn't appreciate me telling you that. Rowan raised an eyebrow. He thinks I'm dangerous to the status quo? Let's just say Helmar values stability above all else. If you upset the balance, he will act, one way or another. Cade's gaze lingered on a particular data cluster depicting the synergy between Arya's cells and the choker's energy readings. For what it's worth, Doctor, I'm not interested in stifling your research. I've seen enough of this world to suspect that change is coming, whether we want it or not. The commander began to exit, then paused at the doorway. Just remember, knowledge can be a weapon. Be certain of your allies lest you become a target. Not everyone here wants the monarchy's power to be understood. Some prefer it remains shrouded in mystery. With that cryptic note, Cade disappeared into the corridor. Rowan turned back to the screen, a knot of apprehension in his stomach. Amid swirling data and half-answered questions, one truth became increasingly clear. The key to unlocking Arya's lethal freeze might lie in unraveling the centuries-old purpose of her sapphire choker and discovering who or what had created it in the first place. Under normal circumstances, Princess Arya preferred solitude in her private quarters, a sanctuary of gently humming crystal walls and a balcony overlooking a moonlit expanse of ice. Tonight, however, she found herself restless. The revelations from Rowan's tests and the anxious gathering of foreign dignitaries weighed heavily on her mind. After a cursory attempt at reading through official documents, she gave up and decided to inspect the progress of her palace staff, especially those assigned to manage the ongoing negotiations and the arrival of more visitors in the coming days. Walking through the corridor, she spotted Lord Helmar emerging from a meeting room where hushed voices still echoed. He closed the door behind him with careful deliberation and inclined his head in greeting. "Your Highness, you're out late." "I might say the same of you," Arya replied, her gaze flicking to the door. "Is everything in order?" Helmar's mild smile never reached his eyes. As well as can be expected, our guests remain cautious, but the presence of the Federation seems to reassure them. And your demonstration with Dr. Cooper earlier has cooled some of their initial alarm. Arya crossed her arms, unconsciously touching the sapphire around her neck. "That's a relief. Helmar, have you ever questioned the origins of our family's powers? The idea that it might be the result of genetic engineering?" He blinked, momentarily caught off guard, then carefully schooled his features. "We have many ancient myths, Princess. Our people have long revered the monarchy for its protective abilities. I'd caution against taking every rumor or modern speculation at face value." "Rumors, perhaps," she conceded. "But Dr. Cooper's findings suggest a more deliberate manipulation of our lineage than mere myth. It might explain how my family's freezing power has intensified over generations, and why this choker appears to manage it." "Highness," Helmar said quietly, stepping closer, "certain records from our earliest eras were lost during the Great Frost Wars, eons ago. Much of our history has been pieced together from half-ruined texts. If there was ever a grand design behind the monarchy's gifts, it's been lost to time." Arya studied him for a long moment, sensing that he was evading rather than answering. "Then there is no reason to hinder Rowan's research, is there?" she asked softly. "We should learn all we can. Perhaps we could prevent accidents like the one with the envoy." A flicker of something akin to impatience darted across Helmar's face, but he maintained his respectful tone. "Certainly, Princess, within reason. But please keep in mind that knowledge can unsettle old agreements, agreements that have kept Glacia Prime secure. I wouldn't want to see your rightful authority undermined by speculation." She inclined her head in acknowledgement, noting the subtle threat. "Rest assured, I have only my people's well-being at heart." With that, she stepped around him and continued down the corridor, her cold aura trailing behind her. Once she was out of sight, Helmar allowed a tight scowl to crease his features. He withdrew a small communication device, typed a brief message, and waited for a single pulse of blue light to confirm it had been received. What he did not notice was that, farther down the hall, Commander Cage stood quietly against a frosted pillar, taking note of every subtle gesture. The commander's single good eye narrowed as he observed Helmar's covert communication. Perhaps it was time to learn exactly how far the advisor would go to safeguard old secrets, and how deeply he was willing to betray Princess Arya's trust in the name of preserving an inherited power. The following morning dawned beneath Glacia Prime's pale sun, casting a diffuse glow that refracted through the palace's ice-laden towers. Cooper made his way to the lower archives, a section of the palace seldom visited by outsiders. It was a labyrinth of crystal shelves stacked with data tablets, carved inscriptions, and ancient texts rumored to be older than the monarchy itself. Soft, luminescent orbs floated near the ceiling, providing the necessary light to read without risking direct heat that could disrupt the delicate infrastructure. Rowan's breath clouded in the cold air as he scanned the spines of archaic volumes. Some were wrapped in translucent protective covers. Others had been carefully digitized, their contents stored in the palace's central memory bank. He was searching for any reference that might help him decode the unusual genomic structures he had encountered in Princess Arya's blood samples. Helmar's warnings lingered in his mind, but his scientific curiosity and growing personal investment spurred him onward. Lost in thought, he nearly jumped when Commander Cade's deep voice called out from behind one of the towering shelves. "Doctor, you're up early." Rowan turned to find the commander stepping out of the shadows. Cade wore a thick, dark uniform embossed with glacial sigils, and his scarred cheek was drawn tight in the chilly air. "I'm trying to see if these older records might clarify the monarchy's origins," Rowan explained. "There's something in the genome that suggests deliberate tampering, for lack of a better term. But if the monarchy was truly engineered, I need more direct evidence." Cade glanced around the archives, his expression thoughtful. "You're poking at the foundation of this world's greatest mysteries. Doesn't that concern you? The monarchy's power has kept Glacia Prime in a state of uneasy peace for centuries. People adapt to the status quo, even if it's built on half-truths." Rowan's brow furrowed. "I understand the caution, but ignorance doesn't solve anything. Every time Arya's powers cause an incident like the freezing of an envoy, her legitimacy is questioned. And if there's a solution hidden in these archives, perhaps a safe way to moderate her abilities, then isn't it our duty to find it?" Cade let out a short, humorless chuckle. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Idealistic, convinced that peeling back the layers of secrecy would save us from our own history." He ran a gloved finger along a shelf, dislodging a fine mist of frosty particles. "So, how can I help?" Surprised, Rowan hesitated. "You want to help? I thought Helmar assigned you to watch me, maybe even stop me if I got too close to something sensitive. Let's just say my loyalties lie with I'm a princess, more than they do with Helmar's sense of tradition." Cade slid a battered data tablet from an upper shelf, scanned its label, and passed it to Rowan. "Here, this volume details early research into the monarchy's transcendent attributes. It's all couched in old religious language, but there might be clues if you know what to look for." Rowan accepted the tablet, noticing that part of its crystalline casing was cracked. "Thank you, but why are you trusting me with this?" A faint gleam crossed Cade's single good eye. "Because I've witnessed enough to suspect Arya's future, and ours, depends on unraveling these secrets. And if Helmar has his own agenda, we'll need every piece of evidence we can gather to protect her." Princess Arya found Dr. Cooper in one of the archive's reading alcoves an hour later. The alcove was a small niche carved into the crystalline walls, complete with a semicircular bench and a soft, bluish glow emanating from hidden lighting strips. Rowan was engrossed in the ancient data tablet that Cade had handed him, occasionally stopping to cross-reference lines of text with what appeared to be centuries-old genealogical charts. His breath formed little puffs of vapor as he read out loud, trying to parse archaic terms. "There you are," Arya greeted gently, sliding onto the bench beside him. She glanced at the swirling columns of data, replete with archaic symbols and references to old rites. "I'm told you've been here all morning. You'll freeze your brain if you don't at least warm up with some tea." Rowan managed a weary smile. "I might take you up on that soon, but you need to see this." He tapped the screen to highlight a passage. It references a ritual known as the Severance of Crystal Tears, and it mentions an amulet or choker worn by the sovereign that has the power to unite or divide the monarchy's inherent potential. The text suggests that the device is both the source and the limiter of the monarchy's freezing gift. Arya's gaze settled on her own sapphire choker. "So it truly is the reason my power manifests so strongly, and the reason it can be kept in check. I've worn this all my life, and no one has told me the real story." Rowan nodded. "There's more. It seems to hint that your ancestors accepted some form of engineering, likely genetic, under the guidance of a faction or group that believed your people needed a living weapon to protect Glacia Prime from external threats. Over generations, the monarchy's ability was strengthened, culminating in the lethal freeze you carry." The princess's jaw tightened. "That means every tragedy I've caused, every envoy or courtier frozen by an innocent kiss, was not some quirk of nature. It was by design." A storm of emotions clouded her usually measured expression. Anger, betrayal, and something akin to grief flickered across her eyes. "Why would Helmar or any of my advisors keep this from me? I'm supposed to rule with clarity, not shrouded in half-truths." Rowan exhaled softly, setting the tablet aside. "They may believe they're protecting you, or they might think the monarchy's mystique has to be maintained for political stability. Either way, it's a burden you never agreed to carry. A hush fell over them, punctuated only by the faint crackling of the crystalline lights overhead. Finally, Arya met his gaze, the swirl of emotions in her eyes settling into a determined calm. If my choker is both a conduit and a restraint, then perhaps we can find a way to adjust it or remove it entirely. I can't go on fearing every single kiss, every brush of contact. My people deserve a ruler who can stand beside them without causing harm. Rowan placed a tentative hand on hers. The cold of her skin still sent a mild tingle up his arm, but not the bone-freezing chill that would have felled anyone else. We can test that theory, but we need to be very careful. If the choker is truly regulating your power, taking it off abruptly could trigger unpredictable surges. We might see bursts of lethal cold or even permanent transformation. Your body has existed under this device's influence for your entire life. A tremor of fear passed through Arya, but she steadied herself. I understand the risk, but if we do nothing, the situation never changes, and Helmar might continue to leverage this secret for his own ends. Her grip on Rowan's hand tightened, the sapphire gem on her choker responding with a faint glimmer. Promise me one thing. If we find a safe way to release this hold on me, we use it, no matter who tries to stand in our way. Princess Arya's resolve found its first true test that very evening, when Lord Helmar summoned her to a clandestine meeting in the depths of the palace. She agreed to attend, but only if Rowan accompanied her as a neutral Federation observer. Helmar was less than pleased, but he sent no direct objection. Thus, Arya and Rowan descended a spiral staircase carved directly into the ice, the walls illuminated by faint lines of crystalline circuitry that pulsed with bluish luminescence. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, as though the planet's ancient core breathed frost into these corridors. They reached a set of heavily reinforced doors, each etched with the crown sigil of Glacia Prime's monarchy. Two guards stood at attention, faces partially hidden by fur-trimmed helmets. Without a word, the guards pushed the doors open, revealing a domed chamber that thrummed with a subdued mechanical heartbeat. The far wall featured a massive crystalline console, older and more elaborate than any technology Rowan had yet seen in the palace. It radiated an aura of quiet power, as if connected to the planet itself. Helmar stood before the console, flanked by a small group of palace officials, some from noble families, others wearing the insignia of palace science teams. In the subdued glow, Arya noticed Commander Cade lingering near the back, arms folded. His expression was inscrutable, but the slight tilt of his head toward her signaled caution. "Thank you for coming, Highness," Helmar began, his tone smooth but laced with urgency. "Certain developments have prompted us to accelerate long-standing protocols. We have reason to believe that your powers, already formidable, have begun to grow more erratic under recent stress. Diplomatic tensions, combined with the Federation's presence, have inadvertently sparked." Arya cut him off, her voice cool. "You mean my demonstration with Dr. Cooper? So the fear is that if more people discover he's immune to my freezing, the monarchy's authority will be questioned?" Her words sent ripples of apprehension through the officials. Helmar's jaw tightened. "Your Highness, you misunderstand. Our concern is not with authority, but with the stability of your powers. If they fluctuate unpredictably, you could inadvertently freeze entire delegations, or worse, part of the palace itself." "Yet you've never mentioned this possibility before," Rowan said, stepping closer to Arya. "Why now? Has something changed in her biometric data that we aren't aware of?" One of the palace scientists, a man with stark white hair and a gaze reminiscent of old glass, cleared his throat. "We have observed micro-surges in the princess's energy emissions since your arrival, Dr. Cooper. It's theorized that your human immunity is causing her choker's calibrations to oscillate, making the device work harder to maintain stasis. Over time, that increased strain might cause a catastrophic failure." Rowan felt a stab of guilt. Could his very presence be causing Arya's choker to overcompensate, thus endangering her? But Arya placed a reassuring hand on his arm, addressing Helmar directly. "What is it you propose?" Helmar gestured to the massive crystalline console. "This is our master regulator, an ancient system that allows us to fine-tune or reinforce the monarchy's power levels through the choker. We suggest temporarily intensifying its restraint function to ensure your abilities remain stable. Arya's eyes narrowed. Temporarily, you say, but if you have a way to tighten the choker's hold, you could also attempt to push my powers beyond safe thresholds. Could you not? The advisor inclined his head, neither confirming nor denying the insinuation. We will do only what is necessary, Highness. You must trust us. A tense silence filled the chamber. Rowan studied the console's swirling energies, noticing that much of its design corresponded to what he had seen in the archives about forced enhancements. Helmar was offering the exact opposite of removing the choker. He wanted to strengthen its grip. If Arya agreed, she risked losing any chance at freedom from this lethal heritage. Yet if she refused, Helmar might claim she was endangering the palace and everyone in it. Stepping forward, Arya locked her gaze on Helmar. The cool determination in her eyes made even the guards shift uneasily. I will not consent to any irreversible procedure, she declared. Dr. Cooper and I will review the data. If it is truly a safety measure, then we will assess how to limit the side effects. But as your princess, I will not be coerced into drastically altering my abilities without full disclosure. In the background, Cade shifted his stance as though preparing for confrontation. Helmar's polished veneer cracked for an instant, revealing frustration. Very well, he said curtly, but do not delay long. Time is of the essence. He waved a dismissive hand at the console and the glow receded, as though the device were slipping into hibernation. The officials parted, allowing Arya and Rowan to exit. Yet as they climbed the spiral stairs back toward the palace's upper levels, they could not shake the sense that a line had been drawn. Whether Arya's next decision would lead her toward liberation or bind her more tightly to her legacy remained uncertain. And behind them, in the hush of that secret chamber, Helmar's narrowed eyes told a story of their own, a story of a power broker determined to preserve centuries-old designs, whatever the cost. Over the next several days, an uneasy lull settled over the palace. The dignitaries remained cloistered in their guest quarters, unsure whether to trust Princess Arya's assurances after recent rumors of escalating tensions. Whispers circulated among the staff about a clandestine project in the depths of the palace, fueling speculation that Lord Helmar was quietly finalizing some drastic measure to secure the monarchy's stability. Arya felt the strain acutely. She had begun to experience strange surges of cold within her body, moments when her fingertips tingled and frost bloomed unexpectedly on nearby objects. It was as if the choker around her neck had grown restless, fighting to reassert its hold. Rowan Cooper, meanwhile, threw himself into round-the-clock research, taking short breaks only when his mind fogged from exhaustion. Commander Joran Cade became an unlikely ally in these efforts, using his authority to grant Rowan access to secure data nodes and rooms normally off-limits to outsiders. This allowed Rowan to confirm his growing suspicion. The monarchy's powers were never meant to be so destructive. Long-forgotten records hinted that earlier generations wielded a gentler form of cryokinesis, capable of lowering temperatures or sculpting ice, yet far from lethal. Something in the last few centuries had twisted this benign gift into a deadly weapon. Marcus Lane also lent support. Officially, the Federation diplomat maintained a neutral stance, facilitating negotiations and reassuring the off-world delegations that no immediate threat loomed. Unofficially, he arranged discreet calls to Federation specialists, seeking advice on advanced genetic therapies that might help Arya regulate her abilities. He even quietly authorized the arrival of a small medical vessel to remain in orbit, prepared to intervene should the worst happen. Yet every day that passed without resolution weighed on them all, and Arya felt trapped in a web of secrecy, with Helmar tugging at the threads from behind palace doors. The princess did her best to keep up appearances, meeting with the dignitaries in the formal reception halls and feigning confidence. Whenever her anxiety spiked, she remembered Rowan's steady presence in the lab and how his very touch seemed to calm the roiling storm within her. His kiss was proof that something at least could resist her lethal chill. But the question remained, could they harness that connection to free her permanently? Or would Helmar force her down a path that sealed her power and perhaps her fate forever? Those questions began to take shape one frigid morning when an urgent page summoned both Arya and Rowan to a restricted sector below the palace. They arrived to find a small unit of guards encircling the entrance to a sealed chamber. The tension among them was palpable, as though they had seen something terrifying within. When Commander Cade emerged from the chamber, his normally stoic face was drawn taut with concern. "It's Helmar," he said quietly, gesturing for Arya and Rowan to follow. "We've discovered evidence that he may be orchestrating a forced transformation using the master regulator. The system is emitting unusual readings. If he activates it fully, it could trigger a massive release of power, one that might extend far beyond this palace." Arya felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She recalled the flicker of frustration in Helmar's eyes when she refused to submit to his plan. He had made no open threats, but it was clear his loyalty lay in maintaining the monarchy's status quo, even if that meant controlling her at any cost. Steeling herself, she moved past the guards into the chamber, Rowan close beside her. If Helmar had set a trap within the very heart of their ancestral technology, then confronting him might be their only chance to avert a disaster. Inside the chamber, the master regulator loomed against a far wall like a sleeping giant. Its crystalline panels glowed softly, lines of pulsing light rippling across their surfaces. At the console, a cluster of cables splayed out from an access port, extending along the floor toward a smaller device that crackled with energy, a makeshift enhancer by the look of it. Helmar stood near this apparatus, inputting commands through a handheld terminal. A contingent of palace officials accompanied him, all wearing grim, resolute expressions. "Lord Helmar," Arya's voice echoed in the cold space, carrying the full authority of her station. "Explain yourself at once. This area is to be accessed only under my command. Yet you've brought unauthorized equipment. Have you forgotten who reigns here?" The advisor turned, and for a moment, his face displayed a flicker of genuine regret, but it quickly hardened into resolve. "Your Highness, please understand this is necessary. The master regulator was created for precisely this scenario, when the monarchy's power threatens to destabilize the planet. With Dr. Cooper's presence causing unpredictable fluctuations, we must reinforce the system now, before your powers spiral out of control." His gaze flicked toward Rowan, who hovered protectively at Arya's side. "This outsider has introduced an element we can't contain. Your aura responds to him in ways we never anticipated." Rowan felt anger flare in his chest. "That's a gross oversimplification. If you'd shared your data openly, we could have engineered a safer solution together. But you've hidden behind secrets and fear." Helmar's lips pressed into a tight line. "Secrets that safeguard our people, Doctor. The monarchy's presence has deterred invasions for centuries. Our illusions of unstoppable power keep potential enemies at bay. If word spreads that Princess Arya's ability can be neutralized by you or anyone else, our planet's security is compromised." Arya's shoulders straightened as she advanced on him. "That may have been a valid concern once, but we cannot live in perpetual terror. Nor can we force our monarchy to be a weapon, especially when we have the means to transform this world peacefully. You've seen the dangers of random freezing incidents. We can't keep feeding that narrative of fear." Helmar's eyes glistened with a steely light. "Fear is a potent shield, Your Highness, and if you will not use it, then the master regulator will do it for you." He pressed a final command on his terminal. At once, the cables linking the smaller device to the console surged with energy. The entire chamber hummed with rising power, as if the planet's icy core itself had awakened. Behind Arya and Rowan, Cade and the guards flinched, stepping back. The air temperature plummeted, crystals forming on the floor. A dreadful sense of inevitability settled over them as Helmar's improvised enhancer poured raw energy into the regulator. Alarms beeped in protest from the console, but Helmar ignored them. On the far side of the chamber, a swirl of frigid mist condensed into jagged icicles, creeping outward like malevolent fingers seeking flesh and bone. "Stay close," Rowan urged Arya, heart hammering. He could see a faint trembling in her frame, as if every cell in her body was being drawn toward that cold resonance. The choker around her neck glowed fiercely, its gemstone flickering in sync with the master regulator's surge. He reached for her hand, desperate to keep her anchored to him. The luminous swirl of ice thickened, forming crystalline arcs across the ceiling. Helmar took several steps back, wearing a triumphant expression. "The system is amplifying your power, Your Highness. Soon you'll be fully synchronized with the regulator's matrix. And once that happens, your body will be locked in this heightened state. No more weaknesses, No more accidents. The monarchy will become an unassailable force. But as energy crackled through the chamber, Arya's gaze locked onto Rowan's. In that moment, he saw more resolve in her eyes than ever before, and he understood that neither the monarchy's illusions nor Helmar's fortress of lies could hold her if she truly chose another path. Arya closed her eyes, struggling to remain calm amid the cacophony of clashing temperatures. Her breath clouded in the freezing air, and the choker's gem radiated pulses of brilliant sapphire light. The swirling cold tugged at her essence, urging her body to merge with the master regulator's forced transformation. She felt an undeniable power rising within, a gale of sub-zero force that begged to be unleashed. Yet it was a power that had, for so long, only brought fear and isolation. In the moments before she would have succumbed, Arya gripped Rowan's hand more tightly, drawing on the warmth of his presence. She sensed the unique resonance in his physiology, that biological quirk that resisted her chill. It wasn't enough to simply stand beside him. She had to harness that strange compatibility. Focusing inward, she visualized her frosty energies as a surging current, and then imagined them encountering Rowan's balancing warmth, each current tempering the other. Rowan felt it too. A raw jolt traveled up his arm, an almost electric sensation as cold and heat collided. He gasped, more in surprise than pain, and forced his thoughts to remain steady. From his research, he knew the lethal chill in Arya's cells reacted differently to his DNA, neutralizing the extremes. If he could channel that effect, perhaps she could resist the regulator's pull. "Focus on me," Rowan said urgently, voice trembling in the icy wind. "You're stronger than Helmar's system, Arya. Let's break the link, one step at a time." His free hand lifted to her choker, but the gem seared his fingers with frigid energy, forcing him to recoil momentarily. Helmar looked on with a combination of alarm and anger. "No, this is for the good of Glacia Prime. We can't allow your bond to corrupt the regulator's function." He jabbed at his handheld terminal, intensifying the regulator's output further. The lines of energy streaking from the console glowed brighter, and the entire floor quaked beneath the strain. A new wave of cold exploded outward from Arya, rattling the walls of ice. Commander Cade fell back with a startled curse, while the other guards scrambled for footing. The arcs of frost threatened to seal off the chamber's exit. Nevertheless, Rowan refused to budge. Gritting his teeth, he braced against the surge, stepping closer to Arya even as the temperature dropped to a level that would have been fatal for most humans. Arya's eyelids fluttered. Every nerve in her body felt like it was aflame with cold, a paradox that threatened to tear her mind apart. Yet Rowan's voice cut through the roaring static. "Arya, you're not alone. I'm here." In a final desperate push, she channeled all her focus on the choker. The gem's frantic pulsing had become erratic, no longer synchronized with her heartbeat. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled, envisioning the cold receding from Rowan's touch. Inch by inch, the lethal frost withdrew from his hands, allowing him to reach the choker's clasp. His fingertips found the delicate mechanism that joined crystal and metal, and with painstaking care, while Helmar shouted protests, he lifted the latch. For one terrible instant, the choker remained fused to her flesh, clinging as though alive. Then, with a scraping sound like cracking ice, it detached. Arya let out a strangled cry, collapsing against Rowan as the device tumbled onto the icy floor. The immediate vacuum left behind caused the swirling cold to stutter, flicker, and then settle into an uneasy calm. Freed from the choker's direct interface, her cell no longer resonated uncontrollably with the regulator's surge. The forced transformation was suspended at the brink. Helmar's hands shook in disbelief. A gash of sharp cold scored the floor where the choker had landed, steam rising from the spot. His entire plan to bind Arya permanently to the monarchy's might shuddered under the reality that she had just cast off the very device that had channeled that power for centuries. In the tense stillness, Arya drew a shuddering breath. Her body felt different. Vulnerable, yes, but also strangely free. Gone was the perpetual hum of the choker, that ever-present sense of being leashed to a force she couldn't fully control. She pressed her palm to Rowan's chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart. The sub-zero aura that should have made his pulse falter was tempered now, reduced to a faint chill rather than a lethal freeze. Helmar, however, refused to concede. With a sharp movement, he snatched the choker from the ground, though it seared his gloved hand. "You don't understand what you've done," he rasped. "That relic isn't merely an accessory. Our entire planetary defense relies on the monarchy's formidable mystique. If we can't harness it, others will come, invaders, colonizers. They'll see our vulnerability and descend like vultures." Arya forced herself upright, leaning only slightly on Rowan. "Invaders might come whether I wear that choker or not. Cloaking ourselves in fear is no guarantee of safety. It only perpetuates suffering for my people. If we can forge alliances built on trust and shared prosperity, we won't need to be an unassailable force living in constant isolation." Before Helmar could respond, an alarm shrieked from the master regulator console. Flickers of white-blue electricity skittered across the floor, and the massive device's readouts spiked. One of the palace officials at the console called out an alarm. "The power buildup is too high. We're nearing an overload. Whatever Helmar did, it's destabilized the entire chamber's energy matrix." Commander Cade lurched forward, barking orders at the guards. "We need to shut it down before it triggers a chain reaction. If the master regulator breaches, it could cause a localized meltdown in the palace's substructure and freeze half the city in a catastrophic temperature plunge." Panicked footsteps echoed as some officials rushed to disconnect the enhancer Helmar had installed. But the machine's cables had fused to the console with thick slabs of ice, forming an unnatural bond. Sparks of freezing energy erupted, forming a swirling storm of crystals overhead. Helmar himself took a step back, clutching the choker protectively as if it were a lifeline. Rowan studied the console's interface. "We need to vent the excess energy safely. If we simply power down, the buildup might detonate." He gestured Arya toward the console. "Your innate control over cold might help dissipate the surge. Even without the choker, you still have some measure of your abilities, right?" Arya pressed her lips together, uncertain. The centuries-old device had amplified and shaped her powers her entire life. Now, newly unbound, she had no idea how fully she could control her freezing gift. Yet desperation fueled her courage. I'll try," she managed, stepping toward the console's controls. From across the chamber, Helmar lunged as if to stop her. But Cade intercepted him, blocking his path with a drawn sidearm. "Stand down, my lord," the commander growled. "We've followed you this far, hoping you acted for the crown's benefit. But you've crossed a line." In that moment, Helmar realized his grip on power was slipping. The confidence that had steered him for years wavered, replaced by frantic eyes darting between the master regulator and Arya. Still holding the choker, he glanced down at it, as though tempted to reattach it to Arya by force. But the princess was already at the console, her hands splayed over the controls, trying to sense how her cryokinetic heritage might diffuse the runaway reaction. The master regulator vibrated with intensifying energy, threatening to burst from the inside out. Outside the thick walls, the entire palace quaked, a subtle but unmistakable sign that the crisis extended beyond one chamber. Icy stalactites along the ceiling rattled, dusting shards of frost onto the officials and guards below. Tense faces reflected the swirling lights of the control panel as Princess Arya attempted to harness her newly unchained powers. She closed her eyes, drawing a slow breath. Gone was the choker's guiding resonance, forcing her to rely solely on instinct. The swirling frost in her bloodstream felt less like a raging tempest now, more like a pliable current responding to her will. From the corner of her mind, she recalled a moment in her childhood, before the choker had been fully activated, when she had turned a small puddle into a delicate ice sculpture, purely by imagining it so. There had been no lethal chill then, just creativity and a sense of awe. As that memory emerged, Arya extended her awareness into the console. Data panels flickered, struggling to contain the outpour of glacial energy. She envisioned each line of code, each shimmering filament, as if they were tiny streams of water that needed channeling. Then, like shaping clay, she willed the overflow to disperse. Step by step, she coaxed the mounting cold away from the console, letting it flow into the air in the form of soft, crystalline flakes rather than violent eruptions of frost. Rowan stood at her side, ready to intervene if her power spiked uncontrollably. Yet to his amazement, the air around him warmed slightly, even as the chamber's instrumentation indicated that the regulated temperature was dropping. It was as though Arya's unfiltered control produced a more natural, balanced cold, free from the savage extremes imposed by the choker. The swirling arcs of frozen lightning subsided, replaced by a gentle flurry of glittering snow that drifted harmlessly to the floor. A hush settled over the chamber. The alarm still blared in the background, but the immediate threat of meltdown had abated. Arya opened her eyes, exhaling a cloud of breath. A surge of relief coursed through her, mingled with sheer disbelief at what she had just accomplished. She looked down at her hands. No lethal aura flared at her fingertips, just the faint, swirling chill that felt more like an extension of her being than a curse. All eyes turned to Helmar, who remained pinned under Commander Cade's stern watch. The advisor's face bore an expression of shock, nearly overshadowing the fury that twisted his features. "You've undone everything," he whispered, voice trembling. "Without the monarchy's perfected fearsome ability, our planet stands at the mercy of hostile forces." Arya straightened. Though drained, a newfound confidence lit her expression. "You always spoke of fear as if it was our only shield. Maybe once that was true, but we have grown beyond it. I will not let you or any relic from the past define us solely by a lethal power we never asked for." She took a step toward him, gaze steady. "Our people deserve a ruler who can protect them without harming them. I can still control ice, but it will be my choice how I wield it, not the enforced design you or the choker laid upon me." Helmar's grip on the choker tightened, the swirling gem at its center now dull, as though it recognized it had lost its conduit. He began to lift it, possibly to threaten reattaching it, but Cade forced him back, pressing the muzzle of his sidearm gently into Helmar's chest. "Enough," the commander murmured. "You've done enough." Behind them, the master regulator hummed at a calmer pitch, the once critical meltdown averted. A hush fell as officials glanced at each other, uncertain how to proceed now that their cornerstone of fear-based security was shattered. In the stillness, Rowan wrapped an arm around Arya's shoulders, supporting her unsteady frame, and she leaned into him, grateful for his warmth. They had taken the first steps toward a different future, and there would be no turning back. In the aftermath, the palace reverberated with hushed rumors. Word spread quickly that Princess Arya had cast aside the ancient choker, subduing a catastrophic meltdown through her own unfiltered abilities. The news sent shockwaves through the upper echelons of noble families, many of whom had been complicit, directly or indirectly, in maintaining the centuries-old system of secrecy. Delegations that had once eyed her with fear or suspicion now found themselves reassessing Glacia Prime's leadership. Guards escorted the shaken officials from the master regulator chamber, while Helmar was placed under formal arrest on charges of endangering royal authority and risking a planetary disaster. He offered no defense, just a cold silence that betrayed both defeat and an undercurrent of zealotry. The battered choker remained in Cade's custody as evidence, its lifeless gem a stark reminder of how close the monarchy had come to losing its autonomy under Helmar's scheme. After ensuring the regulator's stability, Arya returned to her private chambers with Rowan's help. The quarters passed by in a blur as her strength waned. Channeling that much power had exacted a heavy toll. Though physically drained, she felt a mental clarity that eluded her before. For the first time in her life, she was unbound by the ancient device dictating her biology. As they reached the threshold of her rooms, she paused to steady herself against the carved ice walls, breathing heavily. "You should rest," Rowan said gently, guiding her to a seat near the wide balcony window. Beyond the translucent panes, Glacia Prime's sky glimmered with ribbons of auroras. The night was serene, unperturbed by the palace's internal crises. Arya nodded, but a flicker of concern crossed her eyes. "Rest, yes, but I still sense my power shifting. It's not as punishing as before, but it's more diffuse. I need to learn how to master it anew. Will you help me figure this out?" "I'll do whatever it takes," Rowan assured her, pressing a warm hand over hers. "There are Federation scientists on standby who can assist in running advanced diagnostics, if you're comfortable. But even without them, we'll proceed together, step by step. All the research I've done so far will be invaluable in building a stable framework for your cryokinesis." She managed a weary smile. "My people will have questions. Some will be outraged that I've relinquished the monarchy's terrifying aura. Others will be relieved, but they all must be given the chance to adapt to this new reality. No more lies, no more forced illusions. His eyes shone with admiration. That's leadership they can believe in. He hesitated, glancing at her pale cheeks, a small flush color to them, a novelty in her complexion. For now, though, you truly need to rest. We've accomplished a monumental task, surviving Helmar's gambit. Before Arya could respond, a soft chime sounded at the door. Marcus Lane, still wearing his diplomat's uniform, entered with a guarded expression. I came as soon as I heard you were safe, Princess. The Federation Council, likewise, is eager for updates. They're concerned about the Master Regulator meltdown and want to offer assistance. If Helmar's arrest has political ramifications, they're prepared to mediate. Arya nodded. That's welcome news, Marcus. We may need mediators to handle the fallout from Helmar's actions. She gestured for him to approach. But let me be clear. Glacia Prime will chart its course openly now, without relying on fear to command respect. The diplomat's tense posture eased slightly. Understood, Your Highness. Whatever you decide, the Federation stands ready to support you. This could be the beginning of a more transparent alliance between our worlds. Arya's gaze drifted to Rowan, who offered a quiet, encouraging nod. Yes, she murmured, thinking back to the meltdown she had just contained. It's time we begin again. By dawn, a subdued yet palpable shift in the palace atmosphere took hold. Guards who once patrolled the corridors with stoic vigilance carried themselves with a more relaxed posture. The hush of covert glances and concealed worries gave way to open discussions about what had transpired in the depths below. Rumor soon transformed into acceptance. Princess Arya had confronted the Master Regulator, diffused a catastrophic threat, and cast aside the old monarchy's ironclad bonds in the process. As morning light refracted through the ice-spired windows, Rowan and Commander Cade convened in a secure briefing room to finalize the details of Helmar's arrest. The advisor had been stripped of his formal rank until a royal tribunal could be convened. Several nobles who had tacitly supported Helmar's extremist approach now distanced themselves, publicly condemning him to preserve their own standing. Cade oversaw statements to the citizenry, detailing that the monarchy's powers would continue to protect Glacia Prime, albeit in a renewed form free from forced enhancements. Marcus Lane joined them, still fielding communications from concerned Federation councils. The question on everyone's mind was whether the removal of Arya's choker had irrevocably weakened Glacia Prime's defensive capabilities. In that small room, they strategized how best to reassure both the planet's inhabitants and off-world allies that stability remained intact. Rowan emphasized that Arya could still manipulate ice, perhaps with even greater finesse now that she wasn't battling the device's constraints, and that any external threat would be met with the combined strength of Glacia Prime's natural defenses and Federation goodwill. Meanwhile, Arya stood on a terrace overlooking the frost gardens, which sparkled under the early sun. In a symbolic gesture, she had requested that the frozen envoy from days prior be brought out of stasis. Palace medtech successfully reversed the severe frost in his system. Exhausted but conscious, the envoy offered no immediate condemnation or fear. Instead, he thanked her for ensuring he was not harmed permanently, a courtesy that Arya found both humbling and poignant. She offered to meet him personally in the garden, an unprecedented step for the monarchy, which rarely risked physical proximity to those unprepared for the lethal chill. When the envoy arrived, he walked gingerly, testing half-numb limbs. Arya stood beneath an arch of gently swaying icicles, wearing a modest cloak that no longer shrouded the choker. It wasn't there at all. The envoy's eyes flickered with apprehension. Was he in danger of another accidental freeze? But Arya reached out a tentative hand, her touch drawing forth only a mild chill, not the biting frost of before. Surprised relief crossed the envoy's features. I'm sorry for your ordeal, Arya said quietly. Though you acted unwisely, it was our system, my enforced power, that made a simple kiss into a life-threatening moment. We're changing that now. Her sincerity disarmed him. Bowing his head, the envoy managed a trembling smile. I appreciate that, Your Highness. And I'll be sure to inform my government that Glacia Prime is not the monstrous threat some feared. In fact, I hope we can build a more balanced partnership moving forward. The princess's gaze lifted to the crystal sky. That is precisely my intention. We shall remain guardians of this planet, but not under the tyranny of an inherited curse. Watching from a short distance, Rowan marveled at how effortlessly Arya had shifted from regal isolation to a quietly compassionate leader. Their eyes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. The lethal barrier that once encased her in loneliness was gone, replaced by a determination to forge genuine connections. As the envoy departed, clearly moved by their exchange, Arya let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. This was how it felt to extend a hand in peace, without the shadow of her kiss turning to ice. 1 month later, the palace bustled with an event not seen in living memory, a celebration of the thaw. Nobles, dignitaries, and off-world representatives mingled in the grand hall, where ice sculptures flowed and shifted with a new elegance. Instead of rigid, intimidating forms, they depicted scenes of unity, humanoid figures standing side by side, arms raised to the shimmering sky. Musicians played melodic tunes that reverberated off the crystalline walls, weaving together echoes of old Glacia Prime traditions with fresh, hopeful cadences. At the heart of the festivities stood Princess Arya, dressed in a gown that caught every stray beam of colored light. No choker graced her neck. Instead, a subtle pendant rested against her collarbone, a symbol of her renewed sovereignty without artificial constraints. When she addressed the crowd, her voice carried a warmth often absent in this palace of perpetual cold. "My people," she began, "we have lived too long under half-truths and hidden fears. Generations ago, our ancestors believed that only by intensifying the monarchy's abilities could Glacia Prime stand safe from outside forces. But we have learned that true strength comes not from imposing terror, but from forging trust, both among ourselves and with the wider galaxy. Today, we stand on the threshold of a new era." Applause rippled through the hall. Some faces shone with genuine enthusiasm, while others revealed cautious acceptance, still adjusting to the monarchy's transformation. Yet no voice rose in objection. Even the once silent corners of the grand hall seemed to embrace this shift, as if the palace itself exhaled relief at the lifting of an ancestral burden. Near the dais, Commander Cade and diplomat Marcus Lane exchanged glances of satisfaction. Cade had led security efforts to ensure Helmar's loyalists did not undermine the celebration, while Lane had managed delicate diplomatic overtures. Both felt a measure of pride. They had navigated a crisis that could have easily toppled the monarchy altogether. Rowan stood at Arya's side, not as a mere scientist, but as her partner in this unfolding chapter. The Federation had formally recognized him as a special liaison to Glacia Prime, tasked with continuing research into safe applications of the planet's cryokinetic potential. Every so often, he felt a subtle chill drift from Arya, playful as a breeze. No longer a lethal threat, it was more like a gentle calling card, a reminder that her power was now guided by her will rather than an imposed design. A hush fell as Arya lifted her hands, an icy shimmer forming at her fingertips. With precise, delicate control, she sculpted the air into a blooming ice flower, each petal as intricate as lace. Gasps of wonder rose from the onlookers. Though a simple demonstration, it spoke volumes. The monarchy had not lost its ability. It had simply found a path to wield its gift without causing harm. After the speech, attendees swirled in a flurry of toasts and conversations. The once fearsome atmosphere transformed into a lively, hopeful exchange of ideas. Standing with Rowan near a newly commissioned sculpture, Arya allowed herself a moment of genuine contentment. She thought back to the many statues of half-frozen courtiers in the gardens, silent testaments to the monarchy's dangerous legacy. Soon she intended to have them carefully thought as well, offering each victim restoration where possible, or a dignified commemoration if too much time had passed. "You've given them reason to believe in a different future," Rowan murmured, gazing at the glittering arcs of colored lights dancing across the ice. "And you've given me reason to believe that science and empathy together can break any chain." She turned to him, eyes shining. "You helped me realize my curse was never truly mine. It was forced upon me. What I claim now is the gift hidden underneath, the power that belongs to me by birth, guided by my own heart." Their lips met briefly, drawing smiles from passers-by rather than alarm. The lethal freeze was gone. Only a cool, exhilarating thrill remained. In that moment, it was as though the entire palace, no, the entire planet, recognized that this was the shape of true evolution. Not a terror-laced monarchy, but a sovereign whose strength lay in compassion and choice. And so, amid the soaring music and the radiant ice sculptures, Princess Aria and Dr. Rowan Cooper embraced their new chapter, forging a bond that would redefine Glacier Prime for generations to come. From an optimistic vantage point, the journey of Princess Aria and Dr. Rowan exemplifies resilience, trust, and the remarkable power of choice. For generations, fear stood at the center of Arya's life, encasing her in a lonely fortress of ice. Yet through patience, empathy, and a shared determination to uncover the truth, she discovered her gift could be harnessed with compassion rather than dread. By shedding the shackles of a centuries-old conspiracy, Arya stepped into a new era, one where her people no longer tremble at the thought of a single lethal kiss. Their story reminds us that genuine connection and open hearts can thaw even the iciest barriers. Now we'd love to hear your thoughts. Which moment resonated most with you? How do you feel about the balance between power and mercy? Let us know in the comments below. Your insights and questions spark lively conversations, and we look forward to hearing every perspective.